Hi, my name is Sergey Radchenko, and I will do a quick video review of this book, The Struggle for Taiwan by Sulmaan. I've come to like video reviews partly because it's something that allows me to talk about the book quickly rather than spend half a day on a review, which is then published in a journal, sometimes an obscure journal. This is a way of discussing a book with a potentially wider audience and hopefully to get people to read some of this works. So I like the book. I think it's a useful introduction into the subject of how the United States, the People's Republic of China, have wrestled with the question of Taiwan, starting really from 1940, from the end of the Second World War, 1945, until the present. And now Sulmaan is very critical of both the United States and China in their approach to Taiwan. He talks repeatedly about mistakes that were made by American presidents, beginning with FDR. He says FDR could have made Taiwan independent or could have at least opted for a trusteeship. At the end of the Second World War, the idea that Taiwan was going to return to the fold, so to speak, to become part of China was not a given, partly because there was Taiwan was, of course, incorporated into China fairly late as a part of the Qing imperial project. And since other parts of the Qing Empire fell away, like Mongolia, it was not a given that Taiwan would also return to China. So Sulmaan criticizes FDR for overlooking this. He is also very critical of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and he discusses in particular the Taiwan Straits crises of 1954, 55, and 1958. In both of those crises, the question of potential use of American nuclear weapons against China came up. And we have some remarkable quotes here. I'll give you an example if I can find it. On March 6, 1955, Eisenhower told Dulles that he was willing to use, quote unquote, atomic weapons as interchangeable with conventional weapons to defend Jinmen and Matsu. Dulles began to work on creating a better public climate for the use of atomic weapons. And then we have on the next page, or a few pages down, we have another statement here from Dulles. Dulles would once again invoke the possibility of using nuclear weapons. He admitted it might cause, quote unquote, revulsion, but perhaps a small scale set of detonations would meet with limited public outcry. And of course, in retrospect, we do know that some of those questions about potential use of nuclear weapons were indeed considered by Eisenhower. In the end, Eisenhower was the one who ruled this out. Certainly in 1958 he did. But Sulmaan doesn't really talk about that particular aspect of decision making. What he does emphasize is that this was definitely considered and it could have gone in that direction, right? We could have had a nuclear war over Taiwan as early as 1955, 54, 55, and 1958. Right. He criticizes Eisenhower, saying that Eisenhower, and I quote here from the book, Eisenhower was his own worst enemy. He never managed to make up his mind on what was vital and what was not. The pressures of McCarthyism and the convictions of his bureaucrats made the careful parsing of possibilities even harder. The result was strategic drift, a thicker entanglement with the ROC, the Republic of China, and continuing estrangement from the PRC, achieved in a fit of irresolution. So I think you could not say anything harsher about Eisenhower. He really gets slammed here. Then there's not all that much on Kissinger. I mean, Kissinger Nixon get a fairly positive treatment in the book, I think. Then he shifts to the post-Cold War era, and he discusses in particular the 1995-96 Taiwan Straits crisis, which is when the Chinese military flew missiles towards Taiwan as a reaction to Li Denghui's visit to the United States, to Cornell University, but also his broader his election. And Sulmaan Han criticizes the Chinese government much in the same terms that he criticizes the Eisenhower administration. He says here, the PRC was always its own worst enemy. Its sheer belligerence alienated Taiwanese and in doing so jeopardized the KMT's electoral prospects. The shelling and the military exercises simply confirmed that China was not a polity that Taiwanese wanted to be a part of. And then he continues to discuss the story all the way to Xi Jinping, mentions the fact that Xi Jinping, with the crackdown on Hong Kong, essentially destroyed the one country, two systems model, making peaceful reunification completely impossible. Sulmaan Han doesn't say anything good about the Trump administration's approach to China. He says that one suspects here that Trump, the president, did not have a China policy. He operated on ego and political instinct. China policy was whatever happened to please him and his base at a given moment. Depending on his mood, he might have been as willing to provide Taiwan with nuclear weapons as to sell it to China for a trade deal. He might even have tried to do both in quick succession. So obviously not a great fan of Trump. And then in the end, Sulmaan Han ponders the meaning of this complicated history in the last 80 years of China-US-Taiwan relations. And he talks about various possibilities, the things that could have happened. He said, well, on a number of occasions, for example, a nuclear war could have broken out, but it didn't, which should make us feel good. And then he gives it a list of scenarios for where this relationship might go, and he says, well, it could be that the Chinese will not invade Taiwan or even try to, potentially grant independence to Taiwan. He doesn't actually say that this is very likely, but if they do invade Taiwan, then it could go any number of ways. And in any case, it would be a terrible quagmire for the Chinese. Of course, a terrible shock for the world, and potentially could lead to a nuclear war. And then he says this. He says that basically the key thing is to make sure that the channels of communications between Washington and Beijing remain open, for it is communication along with luck that could mark the boundary between deterrence and warfare. And then his final paragraph, he compares the current standoff over Taiwan with the month or weeks that preceded the outbreak of the First World War in Europe. And he argues in particular that although we now know that the events in Europe led into the First World War, they did not have to. As historians, we know that they did not have to result in a world war. And so one positive thing here is that he basically says that a war over Taiwan can be avoided, and that's the main lesson of history. Okay, this was a review of The Struggle of Taiwan, A History of America, China, and the Island Caught Between by Sulmaan Han. I recommend this, a great primer for people interested in the subject.